Welcome guys, gals, and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, one of your hosts. With me as always is your other vernal co-host,
Brian. Hi.
I went through that first take after the long winter.
Yeah.
And I think it was perfect.
It was fine. Happy New Year, Joe.
Happy New Year,
Brian. So it's kind of awkward in this household. We actually don't really speak between podcasts to keep it fresh for the podcast. Mm-hmm. It's definitely not because Joel's insufferable. So yeah, how was your Christmas? How was your New Year?
Well, as we didn't have the podcast over Christmas and therefore we didn't speak for several weeks,
that was the suggestion of my joke. Yes,
it was yes-anding, following on from your joke. It was good. You fucking derailed me. What was that?
So following on from your joke, what you said was my joke again, and then good.
What was your what was that thing about yes-anding that we heard over?
Oh yeah, I don't know. Can't remember.
Yeah, it's not coming straight.
I can't remember. I have no idea.
But yeah, no, I suppose like broadly speaking, nice Christmas, nice break. Play many video games, watch many TV shows, of which we'll talk about.
For sure.
I also I'll mention it briefly here because you won't allow me to mention it in any further detail later in our podcast. But I mainlined quite a bit of the Buffy comic universe.
Oh god!
So I've now read every Buffy and every Angel comic that was published pre
season 8.
The end of the respective shows.
Yeah.
So everything that was published in between seasons and the one shots, the Angel Annual, all that kind of stuff.
How were they?
Varying in quality. Some were good. Some had some very interesting ideas. Some of them did things that Buffy doesn't do. So you know that bit, I think it's actually an Angel, where like a vampire, if they have their heart removed, they can't be staked, but they die in 24 hours. There was a Monster Week episode about it anyway, and they kind of explore that again and show other vampires who try to do it and stuff like that. And those two.
Can you put the heart back in?
No, it's gone. It's a whole thing. Those two anthologies, which were great, which was Tales of the Slayer, which were Slayers throughout history and various choices they had to make, and their watchers got turned, and the one Slayer who was a vampire, all that kind of stuff. That was quite interesting. And Tales of the Vampires, which does a similar thing and had a framing narrative where a vampire has been trapped in the Watchers council building as a storyteller to scare watchers in training, and they kind of go through a whole bit with that.
Sure.
So that was great. There was also a couple of ones where Angel saved Hitler's life, and also where he has had a long running feud with Frankenstein's monster.
Speaking of, we did actually watch Dead Zone, the David Cronenberg
and Christopher Walken.
With Christopher Walken, of the Stephen King novel, which is basically an analogy of if you could kill Hitler in the crib, would you? Which is actually really interesting. Martin Sheen was the Hitler in it, which I was like, rude, given Martin Sheen is the warmest, nicest man who's ever lived.
The demagogue president in waiting who was going to start a nuclear war, which is kind of interesting that he played two very contrasting versions of the US president.
Yeah, pretty much. So enough of that Buffy shit. We watched a lot of stuff for Christmas. We did a Studio Ghibli rewatch, watch through.
Do you want to set us up for what the episode we'll be talking about first?
Oh shit, okay. Okay.
In terms of your Buffy and summary, this week we are talking about season 5, episode 18, Intervention.
This episode was directed by Michael Gershman, who last directed Blood Ties, and it was written by Jane Espenson, who last wrote I Was Made to Love You, and it was aired on April 24th, 2001. The Buffy on summary is... I just still think that joke is so funny. Buffy on summary. Hilarious. Okay. Buffy goes to the desert with Giles to confront the first Slayer, who tells her that death is her gift. Spike takes delivery of the Buffy Bot, makes passionate love, and goes out slaying with it. Xander and Anya are appalled. So Glory's minions guess Spike is the key and abduct him. Glory tortures him for the key's identity. In the course of the rescue, the Buffy Bot is damaged. Buffy impersonates it to find out whether Spike broke and kisses him when she realizes he did not. That word broke there doesn't really do enough descriptive
heavy lifting.
Yeah.
We will unpack all that, decode all the meaning of this episode. But as you were saying, over Christmas, what we'll we started what will probably become a running theme of the Bronze Banter segment, which is
for the next couple of weeks at least.
Yeah, so we decided to watch all of the Studio Ghibli films.
We'll start watching all the Studio Ghibli movies because it's like I don't think we could have packed all of them into over Christmas.
Yeah, no, exactly. So we've each watched a certain amount of the films to differing intensities and in different orders over the years. But what I wanted to do for my own edification, which Brian very, very, very kindly agreed to, is I want to watch them all chronologically to get a sense of them as a kind of complete oeuvre. Yeah.
So I like my background in Ghibli is that I would have watched Spirited Away in about 2004, I would say, which was obviously magical and beautiful and wonderful. And then, I would have watched a lot of Studio Ghibli movies in my teens, which explains, this whole nonsense. I love Studio Ghibli movies. I have very specific opinions about which ones are the best, which is a very clear answer, which we're actually doing tier list of the movies as we're going through, which is fun.
We are making a tier list,
but there were about 6 movies I hadn't seen when we started going into it. So, and
just very briefly, if there is anyone who's yet to have, who's in the wonderful position of yet to have having seen a Studio Ghibli movie, it's essentially a Japanese animation studio that produces primarily, I would say, fantasy, or fantasy realist animated films. There's maybe not exclusively, but
there's maybe like 5 non-fantasy movies, and those have fantasy elements usually.
Yeah, but they are all exceptionally produced, exceptionally written, exceptionally made, varying quality within them. But like they are the antidote to anyone, say someone's mother, who might say that Japanese animation is not worth looking at.
Jesus, Joel. So yeah, and God, we didn't intend to go into like only talk about Ghibli, but there are 2 primary directors of Studio Ghibli, one of whom died in 2018 actually, who is Isao Takahata, which is a real shame, and he's actually the less traditional one. So the more traditionally associated with Studio Ghibli, and the person who's made their most acclaimed works is Hayao Miyazaki, who I never know how to pronounce that. Hayao. Hayao.
We don't know. We can take a run at it.
Miyazaki anyway. And Miyazaki made things like Princess Mononoke, Totoro, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. So he's noted for his kind of brilliance. And yeah, they're kind of stunning. They're like visually just incredible. They're
very funny.
They're very funny. They almost exclusively focus on women and women who are not being empowered but are already empowered. They're very tender and sad and beautiful, and one of my favorite things about them is just how exclusively Miyazaki loves to look at airplanes and aviation and tries to incorporate that into everything he does, and it's very beautiful. Though they're very good, and we're really enjoying them. We're up to Ocean Waves, which is about 1993. Something that's 8 or 9 movies in. So we have about 13 to go. Yeah,
so we will return to this. What I will pick out, a lot of this is either new to me or I have fresh and mature eyes on it. The very first one we watched, which was just slightly predates Studio Ghibli itself, is Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, and probably one of the best films I've ever seen. Essentially a science fiction tale, I think, in the vein science fiction that probably most in tone wise most similar to maybe something like Horizon Zero Dawn, in the sense of it seems tribal initially, but it's actually post-apocalyptic.
And you specifically highlighted it was you said it really reminded you of Ursula K. Le Guin, which is funny because Miyazaki had intended to adapt a Le Guin novel, and she said no because she basically thought that, like, some Japanese animation stuff is not going to be high quality. In later years she got persuaded to allow them to adapt something, and his son adapted it and it was shit.
But this was made in the 80s, and when you look at it, I'm like, oh, this, lots of this seems very familiar. A lot of the tropes, a lot of the settings, a lot of the characters, and as happens, kind of realize that so many later writers of things which we also love have taken massive inspiration from Nausicaa. Not maybe least of which, but most notably of which, a lot of the Final Fantasy games, and particularly the Chocobos, are specifically modeled on animals from Nausicaa.
Yeah, which is great.
But it was utterly enrapturing.
I hadn't seen Laputa before, and that was incredible. I loved that.
Anyway, we could talk about any of them at length, but my takeaway was Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, probably one of the best science fiction films I've ever seen. Really loved it. Definitely worth checking out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, and then TV shows we watch over Christmas. So we watched a lot of TV over Christmas, as you do.
I made a list.
Joel did not create a list from scratch. Don't be stupid. Joel has ongoing, absolutely insane lists that he keeps about the TV shows he watch. And when we have crossed off approximately 25% of the list, Joel reinscribes the list on new pages in his insane notebook.
It's been curated, yeah.
And then adds notes to them and puts a little J in brackets if the TV show is just for Joel.
Yeah. Or net if it's on Netflix.
Okay.
And what you bring to the table alongside fantastic suggestions of things we've never watched.
The exclusive editions on the list of good things are from me.
No,
so.
I found Taskmaster.
True.
I will hang my hat on that. But whenever I'm like, yes, this list is finally starting to go down, you're like, here's 10 new shows I heard about. Let's watch all of them.
Yeah.
So we watched, for example, Pen 15. Do you want to tell us about Pen 15?
Oh, it's so good. It's Maya Erskine maybe, and Anna something whose name I can't.
We haven't learned Hangel's last name because Maya is kind of the star of the show.
She is, and it's basically two 30-year-olds reenacting their 13-year-old selves. So they're doing it
set in
2000.
Yeah.
So basically kind of the same age as us, give or take a couple of years. And they're basically being 13-year-olds in the year 2000, but it's the adult actresses doing it, and they have no shame. And it's horrifying and disgusting and wonderful. Like, they're just, you know the way people tend to portray young girls in like Studio Ghibli kind of things as this like magical, wonderful, beautiful being of sweetness and potential. This kind of shows them as disgusting horn dogs, who are like obsessed with their genitals, which I think is probably true alongside the rest of those things.
Yeah.
But they're wonderful. They have no shame. They're disgusting, and the show is also incredibly true and sweet and like genuine. There was a gay storyline which we both were like touched by how unusually honest and sincere and like not usually portrayed it was. Yeah,
and I think something like this it's like one of those puffer fish you have to cut the right way. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're trying to do what did were we millennials? What the millennials sound like when they were that age and all that kind of stuff, it can very easily seem very satirical or very broad. But like the pitch perfect portrayal of kind of like a couple of things from the milieu of kind of like the Pokemon cards and the slap bracelets and the Live Strong bracelets and all that kind of stuff was just upsettingly accurate. But also what I've been most impressed with is the way the kids actually, teens of that age, actually talk to each other, where sometimes they just like repeat things people have just said, or they kind of say that kind of way. Yeah, but you're trying to construct not just who you are, but also how you socialize with people in a way that's kind of like usually Buffy is maybe a fault for this, but like everyone on Buffy has pitch perfect witty dialogue, but kids sound like they're like trying to figure out how to actually speak. It's been fascinating. I mean, I think what we have particularly enjoyed is that Maya Erskine, I've never seen an actor who has less regard for their own dignity in their portrayal of themselves. She truly debases herself in this role, and her mother on the show is played by her actual,
and it's a really touching relationship.
Mother, and it's really touching. So.
And there's like, I mean, just in terms of like repeating things that you've just heard, there's this one scene where they make a friend and she's awful, and she's like a perfect villain of anything I've ever seen, and she's like talking to her mother, and she's like, "I don't want a quesadilla, you cunt." And the other girls around her are like, "Oh my god, can you say that?" So immediately they go and like they're talking to their own parents, and they're like, "I don't want to go to that, you cunt." And it's just like, and the mothers are like,
of it,
it's pure horror, and it's incredible. Anyway.
This girl who's breaking up the friend group and is kind of just a bit weird. It's like the greatest television villain I hate her. I actually hate her so much.
Incredible.
Otherwise,
what we watched, very brief note about Never Have I Ever, which is the Mindy Kaling TV show about a 15-year-old American Indian girl who, and it's actually, it was really touching, it was really nice. She's recently bereaved, her father has died, and it's kind of exploring just stupid high school friendship stuff not with the like grace and insanity that Pen 15 did. It's a more traditional teen show, but it's like very touching and very well done. And
also, just to note, it's Indian American, as in their family have moved from India to America.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking, was that she is second generation. Yeah, she's second generation American, where her parents would be first generation American.
I just think if you say American Indian, it could read differently.
Oh, true. Indian American is a better way to phrase it around. Yeah. So that's fun, and it was really good, and specifically just dives deep into Indian culture. Within the context of the States, which is just never shown on TV because people are fucking idiots.
And the core friend group, the three, like as much as we like, it's easy to roll your eyes at it, but it's three girls, all with very distinct personalities, who are all from three different cultural backgrounds. None of whom are white. One of whom is queer. That's a diverse starting point. And the Davy, the main character, is kind of unlikable in like a way in a way that's good.
Mindy Kaling always does that.
Yeah, again, in the sense like you don't want, like you can if you're like, oh, I have my Indian American teenage girl, you kind of don't want to take the risk of making her unlikable. It's like, no, people can be unlikable. Like that's fine.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing, is that like you're not trying to show that, oh, you've overlooked this group of the population and they're all perfect angels. What you're trying to say is there's as much diversity and personhood within any group. Anyway,
and lastly, for this particular segment, we will
not lastly, and remember the other thing was we mainlined in 2 nights How To with John Wilson.
Oh my god,
which was immaculate, perfect. It was basically Nathan For You version 2.0.
We've talked about Nathan For You before, and the unerring reality of it and cringe of it, and we're like, we'll never see anything like that again. So Nathan Fielder from Nathan For You has executive produced this show How To with John Wilson, which is very much of the same vein of kind of at times just hard to
real
watch
than reality.
Exactly, hard to watch slice of life where you just put people in situations and see what happens to them. But your favorite segment?
So it's bizarre because he basically has this guy, he's a documentarian, and he has for over a space of decades recorded like just bewildering amounts of content while walking around New York. So he just like ends up, he makes some joke in a script and you'll have a perfect visual to go along with it in video where it's like, he saw the name of some restaurant and that fits in with this, and it's just that perfect visual and montage at all times, which is really good, and it was really touching at the end. But most importantly, at some point apparently while he's walking around New York, he saw Colin McLaughlin and followed him for a while and caught Colin McLaughlin spending about 30 seconds trying to get through the subway turnstiles in New York, and just swiping his card over and over again like an absolute psychopath. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And we both just like took a moment when we were watching. We're like, wait.
And he doesn't acknowledge that's Colin McLaughlin on screen.
And Colin McLaughlin, like, we're not sure if he's aware that he's in it, because like this wasn't him appearing in the show. He was just followed on the street, and it was incredible, beautiful, and wonderful. It's also just really worth watching. The last episode has a weird. It's about the pandemic, which is really weird. It was actually a really good thing about the pandemic, but it was also incredibly outdated because it was from like March or April, and it felt so like weirdly, everyone was acting way like they're like, oh, pandemic, this is new, whereas pandemic is old now.
It was very much on the cusp of people being like, will this be a thing? But that was kind of, we're just at the point there I'm like, that's actually interesting to watch. I think what I'm going to suggest is we're going to take the other thing you're going to talk about and maybe we'll hold that over to the next episode, because I think we have a couple more things we did over Christmas we could talk about.
Like what?
Like games and things like
that.
Okay,
we can talk about some movies we watched too, because we could talk about Host or Possessor,
Mortuary Collection.
We
did a lot of stuff over Christmas.
Yeah, we watched Ted Lasso, basically the other thing, which we really loved. We could definitely talk about that at length. Okay,
so talking about watching things that we loved. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
How did you find this episode, Joel?
So intervention, an interesting one for me, because I don't remember this episode very clearly. I remember these beaks. I know there's a Buffy Bot. I know Spike is gross about it. I know that he develops into more of an actual protector role for Dawn. I didn't remember this episode specifically. So I have to say I didn't remember the Slayer Vision Quest part of this. So interesting in that respect. I don't think it is I think it's a very plot heavy episode. and I think that there's some interesting portrayals in it. I think once again, anytime you give Sarah Michelle Gellar another role to do on the show, it's always great.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value to extract from it in terms of our analysis of Buffy. I think the stuff with Spike has aged incredibly poorly.
Oh, okay. You mean the like dichotomy of like trying to like show him doing a really horrendously gross thing, i.e. create another version of this person to be a sex slave, and then also in the same episode be like, oh, but he's also a white knight. Yeah,
so I see how they think these two things are fairly well pitched to each other. I will say that when he does defend Tong, he is horribly tortured. Like they do make a point to show that it's more than just he gets beaten up. Like he really gets like tortured. Although I think if made that show now, we see some teeth getting pulled out or something like that, whatever. But they portray this. We've already established. Okay, this is my film with this. We've already established that those Bots are semi-sentient in the sense of like that. In the previous Warring episode, they were treated as at least not something to treat like a complete object. Yeah. And also, we've seen so much your ex machinas and all this kind of stuff. We've had a lot of thinking in the years since about like how we treat things that we think of as less than human, how that reflects on
especially
us.
Things that we bestow sentience onto, or not sentience, but like a simulated sentience, like bestowing something with a simulated sentience. When it becomes impossible to differentiate between that and people experiencing it, then all you're saying is that there's some special stuff about humans or living things.
It's kind of like, it reminds me of when Riley found Spike in her house stealing her underwear, and it's kind of like, oh, go home, Roger, that kind of vibe, you rascal. It's like, no, like he actively created this robot, and we see scenes of her blowing him. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And strangling him in the graveyard. It is, I think they let him off as a gang, and also in the writing far too easily. It's playing almost with a doop doop doopy doop, kind of like a funny soundtrack. I think it's really uncomfortable to watch. I found,
I found it uncomfortable too. Yeah, I'm so torn about the Spike thing because I can never quite tell if like I talked about this so many times. Spike, in my mind, is badly written. Ultimately, he starts off genuinely villainous, and then they want to soften the edges off to make him part of the gang. They didn't need to go so far as to make him essentially ensouled, but without a soul. Like, him now at the end of this episode, where he's like, "I would do anything for Buffy because I never want to see her hurt." Like, if you're talking about soulness, unless it's like just like a literal like shiny orb inside you that tells you to do right things, like what's the value of a soul in this universe? Like we saw Angel when he becomes unensouled, he is suddenly racked with the awfulness of everything he's done. What is Spike experiencing here if not that, if you get me, if not that kind of empathy, selflessness at the end of the episode, while also exhibiting absolutely insane or like awful qualities where he's anyway. So yeah, in my opinion, like I think Spike's very fun to write for. Probably, I think it's an interesting storyline in lots of ways to pursue him and Buffy. I think they just kind of went about it half one way, half another way, where they're trying to warn people against fancying Spike and warn people against obsessing or kind of like shipping them because that's against Buffy's character, but then also buying into it themselves a bit, and then getting a lot of fan feedback that they love Spike. I don't know, I can never tell if they're they've written it badly because it's aged badly, or if they've written it badly because just the writers room never got it together on this one, if they wrote it badly because of fan pressure, if it's just it's well written and it never builds to something. It's just it doesn't get there for me. It's just
a storyline that I think one of the storylines to pick out was like, this wouldn't be written today.
No,
and shouldn't be, and not in the same way. I think I absolutely have no problem with him being this person, in the sense that where they have portrayed that Spike as a vampire, as a soulless vampire, tries to emulate this human behavior, but doesn't have the comprehension or the cognizance because he's not human. And it's always going to be, and him and Drusilla will have a twisted version of actual meaningful emotions. That's interesting.
And good, and something to explore. And contrast against everything else.
Absolutely, but like
making him into a romantic hero as well. doesn't sit right.
It harkens back to so many romantic heroes from classic literature or anything. You're like, oh, if you actually break down how he behaves, it's actually really like abusive.
The Heathcliff problem.
The Heathcliff kind of character, yeah. And I do think that
Heathcliff being from Wuthering Heights, not a romantic book at all. Go back and read Wuthering Heights. You should, because the Brontes are some of the most important writers of all time, and also because they wrote for entertainment. They are entertaining novels, and they're also incredible writing. So like Wuthering Heights is probably one of my favorite books of all time. It's incredibly readable, incredibly enjoyable, and I've been reading Jane Eyre, and it's been great. It's been funny and stupid and nice and very deeply psychological. It's great. Anyway, whatever. But
so Brontes, yes. Sex slave, no.
Yeah, pretty much.
Down thumb. I'm making a down thumb gesture. So look, we're gonna have to deal with Spike, and like let me not mischaracterize. I like Spike. I like James Marsters. I like the scenes he's in. I understand why he is so prevalent.
Yeah.
But
and from a TV perspective, like, if you're watching it TV wise, you're like, this is grand. Do this TV thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to inspect it too much all the time.
Yeah.
If you're Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which has asked its audience to inspect this stuff extensively on a pretty consistent basis, and writing in all this depth and complexity into your relationships and your portrayal of vampires, soulness, and all this stuff, then maybe this is just a bad bit of writing.
But we'll unpack Spike over, I think, a longer period of time. What did I like about this episode? Let's start off with the Buffy Bot. I love the Buffy Bot.
Yeah. Sarah Michelle Gellar, like whenever you give her a bit of comedic role to play, she does a great job of it.
She does. She's very funny. She always knows how to play against Buffy's type. And I think, again, another episode where she's impersonating the Buffy Bot later in the episode, it's like another episode where we have our main cast playing versions within versions of themselves, which is very good, and I think it's always a smart move to give her an opportunity to play to her talents in a way that Buffy can't do while she's grieving over her mother or whatever. So I enjoy all that stuff. In particular, I wrote down vampires of the world beware as the Buffy Bot goes to hunt them, or more cringingly, while they're having sex, you're the big bad. A lot of challenging content there.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great device, because obviously she's used later in this season, and also at the start of season 6. So I think that's a useful device to have. And what I didn't remember, and what I enjoyed a lot, was the angle of this episode, which was the Slayer vision quest. And so basically, they go into the desert. It's the desert that she saw in Restless, and it's trying to engage. Jaws like, oh, I never mentioned this, but in the Watcher Diaries, they actually mentioned there's a desert just outside of Sunnydale.
For all the LA based, the California based Slayers.
Exactly, for the Chinese Slayer, probably more problem for her to get there, but you luckily now I can find one how that might work, but it's essentially a device. And what's interesting is you've said it, and I think the episode description suggests it as well, but so she meets a spirit guide who's going to tell her more about what it means to be the Slayer, who it looks like the first Slayer. And she actually asks, are you the first Slayer? And the spirit says, this is just a form I've taken, I am the guide. And I almost took that to read like that this is some other spirit who isn't actually the same thing she met in the desert in Restless. I
would imagine not, because also Zanea never speaks. So this voicing of her wouldn't, as in that's a point they make in season at the end of this season, in season 7 they make the point that she's never spoken, I think. So I
would take this more as, and we don't have to get the George R. R. Martin detail on it, but I would think it's more that this is in some way an interpretation of the Slayer line itself speaking to her. And
that would be traditional of a kind of Native American inspired kind of vision quest writing plot of the 90s, which is basically the idea that you go out and do peyote in the desert to discover something about yourself. And
Buffy follows a mountain lion to find this guide, and we noted that you can see the mountain lion's handler off screen or slightly off screen in 2 shots.
It was also very bizarre in the sense that it was very similar to I Was Made to Love You. Was that what the episode was called with April? I Was Made to Love You.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Where just the visual quality was all over the place. The scanning for
really
the DVD
muddy.
was shit or something. Anyway, But there are lots of like camera equipment and stuff in the sides of this episode. Her vision quest was good, and it injects the great storyline into this episode, which is basically Buffy asking at the beginning of the episode. She's basically communicating to Giles that she thinks she needs to take a break from being a Slayer because, and Giles says, "Oh, but you're so strong and so
you master so much."
And she says, "Well, that all sounds like a way to say that I've hardened." Mm-hmm. And it's a really sad note about Buffy, I think, and it's a very sad thing. I think that it communicates about adulthood, which I think, Mark Field suggests this in his chapter about this episode. But this, Buffy as metaphor for growth into adulthood, where you have to accept, find yourself and, try to incorporate your very shadow selves, all this kind of Freudian and Jungian nonsense. You have to, this part, like the idea that you becoming an adult means that you harden, that you lose some of the kind of wonder or softness or hopefulness that you had as a child. Like, it's probably something that a lot of people experience. Most people experience probably. And it is something that Buffy's experiencing here. I mean, like, of course she feels hardened and emotionless and awful when she has to experience all the awfulness of Slayerhood and then also lose her mother and stuff like this.
Yeah.
So basically what the first Slayer guide, I'm not sure how we'll refer to her, communicates.
The Slayer Spirit. What she communicates to Buffy is that the Slayer is many things. It's, but it is also love, and then communicates death is your gift, which, if there's one line that I can quote from this show, it's definitely that. Yeah. So good. And the Slayer Spirit also says something else, which immediately kind of perked my ears. The Slayer forges strength from pain, which I think is like a great one to unpack.
Joe's gonna get a tattoo of that someday.
Yeah. I'm going to get a tattoo of the Buffy Boys logo when we finish.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I'll wrap that around it. But I think that's an interesting one, because I was expecting that exchange to be like, you have to be a weapon, you know? But the Slayer Spirit was very much like that you can be overflowing with love, but the Slayer is a direction. It's a direction of travel, and Buffy is always the hand in that respect, but hands can be tools for both creation and destruction.
Ooh. I like the exchanges. I thought that they could have built out that whole thing a bit more in this episode. At the same time, like, you don't want to go into Restless Part 2, especially if it feels like you're going into Restless Part 2 to deal with the aftermath of the body, you know. But I think this episode is really important for the aftermath of the body, because it gives Buffy a way to go to the desert and find herself, while also giving Sarah Michelle Gellar a way to express comedic chops, to reintroduce the audience to a more lighthearted Buffy, and then give her a reason to be angry and then tender towards the end of the episode. So by the end,
whole range in this episode. Yeah,
by the end of the episode, our Buffy, not the Buffy Bot, has gone through, kind of like grief and numbness to exploration, to return, anger, and then, forgiveness of Spike. So it's a real reset of the character. You can kind of feel like she's going into the next episode feeling like she's able to deal with a gamut of emotions, which is great. And it's very important for continuing on with the show, which has a couple of episodes left, and they were presuming up until cancellation at the end of this season.
Wild.
Yeah, I know. And I think it works. I think when Buffy returns from the desert and they're like, "Oh, you changed quickly," because basically the Buffy Bot was like, "I'm going to get dressed in something more Slayery," and Buffy comes back and she's looking great. And she immediately acts like Buffy again. I thought that, like, just acting wise was great.
Yeah, I thought that she was like, you couldn't tell that it wasn't me. It was like a very good point.
Yeah, especially given how incredibly quickly they all copped that April was a robot.
Yeah, and like the fact that people act under the influence so often on the show. I think if that happened to you once, you'd be constantly aware of it, you know. But one of the very good notes about that was the first thing that in this kind of plot device where they eventually realize that Buffy is off is she didn't ask about Dawn.
Yeah.
And when our Buffy returns into the scene, the first thing she asks is Dawn okay, which I thought was a good note. But there was a scene where Dawn gives her permission to go off into the desert and all that kind of stuff, and both Dawn and Buffy could say to each other, I love you very much. And it's not played for laughs, and you know, it's really kind of played very straight. I thought it was a very sweet moment, because you do need, in amongst all this sniping, you do need to establish that they do have that familial love for each other.
Yeah, and I think it's also very important to incorporate that, like, Dawn is absolutely fine in this season. I mean, she gets a bit annoying, I think, in season 6, but like, people are so harsh about Dawn. In season 5 at least, and I don't have hugely fresh memories of 6 and 7. Like, she's been absolutely grand, like someone who's going through a lot and who's doing her best. Anyway, whatever.
So on the other side of that, in the episode, we have the Glory plot, and one thing I have to say that by a shoestring is the idea that Glory is just going to keep hanging about in the apartment until the gift happens, basically. Yeah,
seriously.
And Buffy's like, oh yeah, I chased a giant snake near here, but like maybe I'll look into it now and start knocking on some doors. And they still don't manage to find her apartment. They find the building and they get into the lobby, and that's kind of it. Yeah. So it is definitely a trick you can't pull twice, because we, as has happened since time immemorial in comic books and things like that, when you have a character as powerful as Glory is, you can't deploy her too often. Yeah, because either she loses her effectiveness or she will destroy the main cast.
Realistically, I think she was introduced a little too late in the season.
A little too early, do you mean?
Too early, the other one, yeah.
Yeah, potentially. But I do think the stuff... I know all the minions are gross and some are funnier than others, but the one who was kind of in this episode, other than Jinx, had the most lines, I hated him. Like, I know it really annoyed me. But I think the stuff with Spike and that sense of like him very visibly, she sticks her fingers inside of him, you know, and
not in a good way.
Not in a good way. Kicks him across the room. Helpfully kicks him out of his manacles rather than tearing his arms off. Glasses him in the face with a water glass, like it's proper like torture, which I think that does help as beef up his storyline, where it's like he has actually, because vampires can take a beating, but like this is going to take him a while to recover from. Yeah. So I appreciate that, and definitely they are honing and circling closer in on what the key actually is, which is kind of an interesting tension. Something I remember from this season, which will happen later on. But when they kind of decide that they can't fight Glory and they try to hide in the desert, like I always found that quite scary, whereas like they just have to run. So I feel us accelerating towards that. Yeah,
that's only 3 episodes away. That's episode 21 as far as I know. I always find it my huge memories of this season is really liking Tara and Willow. I wonder why. And being very sad that Tara gets benched so early in the season. She doesn't. She gets benched in the next episode. Yeah. Which is like, you know, when she's gone for 4 episodes total of the season, where she's babbling and she's been drained.
Where Amber Benson was actually taking naps on set, apparently.
Yeah. And that's just, I don't know, I always find it very, very odd. Anyway.
I definitely will remember season 5 as the episode where Tara goes crazy, or the season where she goes crazy. It's not a thing as such.
Yeah. I'm glad it's not a huge amount of her screen time of the show full, like in its fullness, because she spoilers, she obviously doesn't make it out of season 6 alive. But she has a good 2.5 seasons of, we get 2.5 seasons of Tara-ness at least. I saw a really awful TikTok the other day, which was like, my favorite lesbian roles from TV, and it was just a bunch of, me as a bunch of lesbian roles I love from TV. And like the idea was that you're supposed to be dressed up as them, and it's just a bunch of like dead women lying on the floor, because lesbians in TV get killed very often. Anyway, do you have anything else, Joel, that you wanted to hit on in this episode?
No, I think it's all the significant themes. I think it was a very plot progression episode.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, just as like I think we've touched on it quite a bit. Obviously, in the last scene, Buffy pretends to be the Buffy Bot. She goes to see Spike. She desperately needs to find out if he's spilled to Glory as to what the key is. And he reveals to the Buffy Bot, thinking that it is the Buffy Bot, that he would never do that. It would destroy Buffy, so he can't. You could never tell who the key is. And Buffy leans in and gives him a kiss and leaves.
Yeah, and says that like what you did here, that was actually real. Yeah,
which is sincere and nice and interesting. I thought it was like an interesting note. One or two, like, you know, totally dichotomous notes within the episode, but dichotomous, is that what I mean? Is that a word?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Great. But yeah, it was well acted by both Sarah Michelle Gellar and Stephen as James Marster.
Stephen.
Who the fuck is Stephen? What am I watching with the Stephen in it? I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, great. Well, should we move on to the dusting?
Yeah, absolutely. So
2 years later, I still don't know. I can't call by off my head like the segments of the podcast.
You still refuse to believe that our podcast has segments or a structure or listeners or anything like that. You know, it's a mental exercise to allow you to do it every week.
Joel and my brother piled on me over. That sounds awful. They were being mean to me over Christmas about the podcast. They were like, "Joel always tells you you're wrong." Ha 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 ha. And Joel was like, "Yeah, I do." Ha 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 ha.
Like it's that kind of witty banter that keeps us in our paychecks on this podcast. So yeah, in terms of good dusting, a couple of things I know. Giles likes to cook. He mentioned that. I was interested by that. Giles, Anthony Stewart Head is actually one of the TV shows we're going to talk about in our Buffy banter, our Bronze banter next week.
Yeah,
and he's still great. I felt that Xander went up in my estimation in this episode because I thought that the way he pursued Spike and tried to protect Buffy and the tone of it was actually pretty okay for me. I was like, yeah, this is reasonable. I was like, I feel better about Xander with this. And also, in terms of the fashion in this episode.
Oh, no, wait. I have to do Buffy Bits first. You don't know the structure of this of how we do episodes. We do Buffy Bits and then we do fashion.
I consider them all part of the one melange. But
tough. We decided that they weren't. So the fact that you consider it to be part of the same melange means that you just haven't separated your notes out, Joel, and you want to go through them.
I don't have a joke.
Yeah, okay. So Buffy Bits. Apparently the Kelly Donovan, Nicholas Brennan's brother, acted quite a few of the scenes because Nicholas Brennan had pneumonia during this. We did look at Nicholas Brennan's Twitter account recently, and that was a mistake.
He's on Cameo, if anyone's interested.
He is on Cameo. I quite like Giles saying the hokey pokey. That was quite fun.
In Swahili.
Yeah, and he does speak Swahili, and none of the notes I saw about the episode note that this Swahili is horribly mispronounced or inaccurate, which is shocking. The most disturbing image from the episode is by far the Buffy Bot just spreading her skirt out and riding Spike in the middle of the graveyard.
Yeah, it's not great.
It was incredibly explicit.
Yeah.
I was very uncomfortable with it. Yeah, actually, I don't have any other crazy Buffy bits.
Do you think vampires are cold to have sex with?
Yes. I would say probably cold. Very little warm blood. Anyway. Fashion notes. So my fashion notes are, I quite liked both what Buffy and Giles were wearing when they go to Giles, sorry. When they go to the desert. Buffy's wearing a brown turtleneck kind of sweater and a brown leather jacket, and Giles is wearing a leather jacket. Incredibly confusing that they are wearing that to go to the desert. I mean, it gets cold in the desert at night, but during the day it's pretty warm.
They were remarkable. They were winter clothes they were wearing. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as we noted, that when Spike gets the crap kicked out and he has his messy hair and his shirt ripped open, it's probably also some of the best he's looked, but also probably some of the most punk rock he's looked.
Yeah, for sure. Otherwise, I quite liked Willow's aviator jacket later on in the episode. I thought it was quite nice. I think that's pretty much all my fashion notes. I didn't like what Gloria was wearing. It was like a blue slip. It was only okay.
Dawn was wearing one of her many nice
T-shirts, long sleeve T-shirts.
No, not long sleeve t-shirts, but kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like powder blue turtlenecks.
Yeah.
She has a good jumper collection, so I was a fan of that as well. So we move on to the rate.
Let's let's do the death count first.
Oh god, death count. No, I'm not prepared for that. Sorry, I forgot that we did that. 1 second. Okay, so in terms of death count, we have 3 vampires staked in the confrontation in the lobby. 1 by Spike, 1 by the Buffy Bot, and 1 by Anya. Notably, Buffy Bot manages to find the heart on the vampire on her first try, which is something that neither Buffy nor Dawn managed to do.
True.
And 1 minion of Glory, who was killed by Buffy with an arrow from a crossbow.
Pretty good going. Okay. Rating. What's your rating, Joel?
I would say I will give this episode maybe a 7.3 glass shards in the face.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I like many episodes in that range. There's a lot of elements I found either entertaining or interesting from this episode to add to the mythos, but very just keeping the plot turning over, and I do find the Spike stuff just did not age well for me.
Fair enough. I'm going to give it 7.8 scabby morons out of 10. I actually found the comedic chops of the episode quite good. I thought the closing scene was quite effective. I do have problems with how the stuff is being written and how the overall portrayal of Spike is generally, but I didn't find it took away from my enjoyment significantly. I thought it was a well written episode for sure. Overall within the episode, good writing, and yes, definitely a bit of a trudge towards the end here at the season 5 conclusion. I think, but that's okay. Okay, the Cordelia chase. Weird episode.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this episode was Lindsay's Hand of Faith. It was about Lindsay getting... Actually, no. Lindsay Hand of Killer. Lindsay gets a transplant to get a new hand. It is from an organ farm of people, and the hand keeps writing kill, 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 and he finds out it means kill me because the guy is being kept alive to farm organs out of. And the angel...
Actually, didn't even catch that's why he was writing kill. That's a good point.
Oh.
Genuinely.
Okay, that's weird. Angel and his crew, Cordelia is being sad because she keeps getting visions, and she's worn out from that. And
yeah, it's pretty good.
I don't know anything else about the episode.
Yeah, so in this episode, Dead End,
that's what I said.
We have basically Lindsay's parachuted out of the show, so he's gone for a good stretch of time now.
And he looks really cute at the end when he's leaving.
See, this is one of the weird things. This is a really strong episode for Lindsay as a player in the cast. I mean, he looks well. He has some interesting scenes when he resigns from Wolfram Heart. He kind of goes crazy and threatens people, and that's a bit of character. He has a scene where he is in Caritas and he is playing guitar and singing, which his actor actually sang for, and the whole thing is that he's a great singer and Angel's a terrible singer, which is quite good. And him and Angel, although they're on different sides of things, teaming up to do a thing is a nice dynamic, and then they yeet him on that note.
Yeah, when does he come back?
I don't know exactly, but it's definitely a stretch of time, half a season or something like that.
Oh, right.
And then Lila becomes the main Wolfram and Heart focus for there on. But otherwise, it was fairly accurate. So it's all about his hand transplant. We have the opening scene where the bisexual dad from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend stabs himself in the eye because he got an eye transplant as well.
Oh, okay, I've forgotten why that was. Anyway,
yeah, so they all got organs from these various people who have been kidnapped from Wolfram and Heart for these kind of medical procedures. And we are developing the storyline where Cordelia, as a human, is finding it harder and harder to deal with the visions that are being kind of impressed upon her and experiencing the horror of them, which I always think, while that obviously is there's a certain questionable element of imposing that on your sole female main character, I do think it's an interesting note, you know, given that they didn't intend for her to have the visions when they pitched the show. I think it's an interesting that's how it's developed. So I think that there's a lot of...
If it was one note about Cordelia's character amongst many, rather than one of the many injustices done onto her.
No, absolutely.
Absolutely. She is a magnet for torture in this show.
No, absolutely. But otherwise, I think as a swan song for this era of Lindsay's character anyway, I think it's quite good. I think him and Angel always have great banter together. I wonder
why.
Yeah. I think the stuff... some of the scenes in Wolf from Hearts are better than others, and this stuff was pretty good, although I often find that like when they try to portray that they have to deal with actual legal issues, it's like, but you have magic, like this is not a thing. And also I don't understand necessarily why they continue to come back to Wolfram and Hart internally. I think they made a real misstep. Wolfram and Hart should be like this faceless edifice that we have to attack kind of thing.
If not faceless, then like, I mean, certainly it should be faceless to Lindsay, and like, you know, obviously they don't know the Lindsay and Lila don't know the major partners, the
senior partners.
There you go. But like, if Wolfram and Hart felt scary to them and felt like threatening and weird place of mystery to them, and we only saw through their perspective every so often, to be good, but they seem really dead set on portraying a lot of banality within Wolfram and Hart, which I think doesn't really work. They're saying this is the locum of all evil in LA, and also like, lol, it's Howard's birthday this week. Yeah, they
got seduced, and they got seduced by the amount of jokes they can make about where it's like, oh, it's Howard's birthday, I guess it'd be eyeballs in the canteen again. Like, you know, if hell was a cubicle workspace, you know, they got seduced by that.
And like, there's a way to do that where like, you know, it's, you know, banality but also a deep evil, but like they never portray the deep evil well in any way. Anyway, I don't know.
Some key moments in this, or some highlights, is when Cordelia, who is now fully forgiving Angel, says, "Oh, I love you," and David Boreanaz has this like smile that spreads slowly across his face and so warm, and so out of character. So I enjoyed that. I think that the device of Caritas as the karaoke place is actually reasonably decent, because I feel like, again, it kind of cooks through a lot of the exposition potentially. Why are they talking to each other? Why are they together? How could they find this age, etc. And then the last note of the show and the exchange or with them is pretty decent as Lindsay leaves LA. But a really strange note for Angel's character, where he's like, "Oh, be careful, there's a lot of cops on the road," drives off in his plantation area truck, and Angel presumably has taken a marker and put a sign on his car that says "Cops suck," and I don't know, maybe you want him to get shot on the way out of town, or I don't know. It's a weird note.
Well, he's white, so
but yeah, so I think all in all, as an episode of Angel, in terms of progressing the plot, developing the characters, you know, an interesting enough monster of the week. It's very much, if they're pursuing this idea of like magic meets technology, and it's like, well, I have organ transplants, but also with demons, etc. Okay, cool. And some good character moments. I would probably give this a 7 fail feminist gestures.
I was thinking also 7 fail feminist gestures.
As always, we agree. So yeah, that's Angel for this week.
You know, it's nice. People believe it when I say, yeah, I agree with you on that, or I give my thing. No one believes your ratings anymore, Joe. When you go second,
my credibility has been compromised.
Yeah, you know, I forgot to talk about that I watched right after we recorded the last episode of the podcast was I May Destroy You. Was that what it was called? Anyway, I think it was called I May Destroy You. But I watched it just before Christmas, and it was incredible. And if you have 10 hours, sorry, it's actually less. It's like 6 hours to go watch an incredible TV show. Go watch that. That's it, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God.
So, guys, gals, non-binary pals, thank you for...
That's not how this finishes.
I was saying a new thing. I was having an original thought. Thank you. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, thank you for joining us in 2021 and rejoining us for the podcast. We hope it's a good year for y'all. We are happy to be here. Stop looking at me. And if you enjoyed this episode, as always, please let us know. Tell your friends, tell your desert spirit guides, and we will see you same Buffy time, same Buffy channel next week on
Buffy Boys.
See you there. Bye.
Slán.